Hi guys, so feeble glutes and back pain. So it's pretty common for a lot of people who've got back issues. They've generally got some sort of hip dysfunction below the back, which is kind of contributing to the lower back being overworked. So again, generally you haven't got a weak lower back if it's painful. You've just got an overworked back, and it's the things that aren't helping that are basically your weaknesses that you probably need to work on in terms of exercise selection. So there are a few reasons why this could be happening, but probably the most obvious one is that most people just have a very sedentary lifestyle where they barely move, especially now that people tend to work from home as well, because of COVID and all the other sort of reasons. People sort of tend to work from home, so when they're working at home, they're probably moving even less than they would do in the office. At least in the office, they'll go and socialise, get coffees, do things, move around, go and see people. Whereas when you work at home, you literally just stay still for probably predominantly 8 hours a day and don't move at all. And if you do, it's probably just the toilet and back. So obviously, skills are specific, strength is a skill. So if we've got weak glutes, we've got someone with back pain and they've got weak glutes, then probably the most obvious contributing factor is that when you sit for long periods, you tend to sit with your glutes in a very sort of weakened, stretched out position where they're not moving and not doing anything. If anything, the body's probably going to almost let them go completely to sleep because you don't need to use them. And of course, you're going to be kind of hanging off your hip flexors here in the front of your hips. So what happens very crudely is you end up with sort of, kind of tight, strong, dominant hip flexors and kind of weak, feeble glutes behind. And when these hip flexors get very tight, again, they tend to increase because of where they attach and the angles of the muscles and how tight they become. They tend to increase that kind of tension on your lower back. So if you tend to feel that kind of pain going across your lower back, usually it's a good sign that your hip flexors are pretty tight and your glutes are super feeble in comparison. So one of the things we need to do for a lot of people, one of the first things you need to do is try and readdress that balance a little bit more, try and take some tension out of the hip flexors, so less prone to being tight, and try and get some strength into the glutes, so they can sort of help control and bear some of that load and take it away from the spine. So have a look at how I do that. Obviously, bear in mind this doesn't work for everybody the way that I'm exactly doing it, but for a lot of people it can be a good start. And for a lot of people, if you can sort of, if your back pain tends to buck you over to one side, sometimes this can have quite profound effects in helping you to stand up straight, nice and tall, and get you moving again. But as a short term, long term, there's going to be other things you need to work on, but as an initial step, it may get you out of trouble. I like to start because obviously, most people have generally got very tight hip flexors and quads, or just muscles on the front of your thighs, to simplify it. So if they're very tight, you're going to find it very hard to try and squeeze your glutes because they're kind of almost going to resist against you and make it a bit too hard. So what I like to do for a lot of people is get them to take some of that tension away in the quads, so it makes it a little bit easier to get those glutes to fire. So we just do that with what we call like quad rolling. So there's a few different ways you can do it, but the way I generally do it is I get people to come carefully down onto one leg, so they've got their elbows to support their weight. The other leg is out to the side for a bit of support on the knee, and we just drop that weight onto the leg we're going to roll. And what we do first is we have a little scour, so we're looking for tight spots in the quads and hip flexors. And once we've got what we think is the worst spot, we're going to stay still on it with a pressure, and if we can, we're going to do some pull throughs like this. So if it's super tight, we're just going to go tiny little movements initially. And over the course of 1 to 2 minutes, we're going to see if we can trick those muscles into letting go a little bit and get some of that tension to kind of dissipate. And as we go, we can get slightly bigger and bigger movements. But if it's super tight, just start with tiny movements. Tiny, tiny, tiny. So the key is not to brute force it, but to encourage it to let go. So once we've done one side, we'll come and exactly the same thing, 1 to 2 minutes on the other side. Same idea. Have a little scale for your tight spots. Once you've found it, just start small and then gradually get bigger as you need to, as you can, and get them to let go a little bit. And you find once you take some pressure out from there, it's going to be a little bit easier to get the glutes to fire, especially in things like a glute bridge. Okay, once we've taken some tension away from the quads, what you need to do is kind of replace it with kind of strength and tension elsewhere. Otherwise, the danger we might leave our back a little bit unstable and a bit susceptible to like an episode. So we're going to do some glute bridges now. So again, this isn't going to be the best start for everybody, but for a lot of people, it can have quite profound effects just pairing these two exercises together. So what we're going to do, we're going to have a band around our legs. I like to put it just below my knees, but you can put it just above as well if you want. Have our feet about shoulder width, hip width or shoulder width apart, about 5-degree turn out with our feet. And then what we want to do now is grab the floor a little bit with the feet. So we're going to go full on eagle's talons, or half our floor comes off the floor. We're just going to grab, put some pressure with our toes and our foot, so we've got a nice stable base. Once we've got that, we're just going to put a little bit of tension on that band. And now without moving anything, I'm going to try and tense the glutes a little bit, get some pre-tension. And if I can, a little bit of brace here as well, hands out to the side. And what I'm going to do with that pre-tension engaged is squeeze very slowly off the floor, trying to ensure that I get that movement coming from just the glutes. I'm not trying to grab my hammies or my back, like this, and down. If I feel the hammies come in, I'm just going to cut short straight away and try and re-engage that pre-tension and slowly squeeze up. So you only go as far, as high as you can while maintaining that squeeze in your glute. If it slips into your back, your hamstrings, it's starting to go wrong. So you might need to come a bit lower. The other point is as well, what we don't want to do is we want to try and avoid sort of, people sometimes get taught, because it's easier to squeeze your glutes, peeling your back off the floor like this and coming up. So, worst case scenario, if you've got an active disc bulge or herniation or just generally flexion intolerant, that's going to make your life worse, not better. But also, skills are specific and perishable. So if you learn to control your glutes by having to round this, the only way you're going to get your glutes to fire properly and do things like deadlifts, squats, is to try and do the same thing, which is going to get yourself in all kinds of trouble. So far better from day one if we learn to have a little bit of brace, and albeit if it's slowly for now, we learn to try and keep that low back nice and stable and straight as possible, and squeeze through the glutes without disturbing that too much, so that later on that skill is going to carry over into bigger movements a lot more safely. But again, it's all about a nice slow squeeze and using that band to help give us a bit of feedback from the glutes. Squeezing up, and if you can, a nice long 10-second squeeze at the top. The goal with these is to make the glutes burn, work way up to sets of 8. So rolling the quads and doing this, like they work well together. And for some people, if I need to get a bit of an instantaneous release to help them to stand up again, I'll get them to superset those two things. So they'll roll their quads for 2 minutes each side, set glute bridges, back to quad rolling, back to glute bridges, back to quad rolling, back to glute bridges. On each successive round of those two exercises, the quads will get looser and looser, and it should get easier and easier for them to fire their glutes up and get them to kick in. And once they do, they find they can generally stand up, pretty much bolt upright straight away, and start walking around again. But again, doesn't work for everybody, but give it a try, see if it helps you.